At my sister's memorial service in Obama Kingdom, my niece Patricia stood before the crowd and announced that her mother's true best friend wasn't me, but a woman named Victoria Matthews. She said Victoria had been more family than anyone else. I sat in the back corner of the church hall, wearing my black lace wrapper, watching as everyone turned to stare at this glamorous woman in the front pew. She wore designer sunglasses and gold jewelry that caught the light. Meanwhile, I was the one who had raised Patricia when my sister Rebecca got sick. I was the one who paid her school fees, who stayed up nights when she had malaria. But that day, I became invisible. 2 weeks later, the family lawyer told us that Rebecca had left her house, her business, and even her savings account to Victoria Matthews. Not 1 naira for me, Margaret Williams, her only sister. Victoria smiled at me across the lawyer's desk with pity in her eyes, as if I was some charity case. But when I pulled out the documents I had been keeping for 20 years, that smile disappeared faster than morning mist. I never thought my life would start over at 53 years old. My sister Rebecca died from complications of diabetes. She had been managing a successful clothing boutique in Victoria Island for years. Everyone knew her shop. She sold the finest Ankara fabrics, Swiss lace, and imported materials. Rebecca always said she would take care of me because I had sacrificed so much for our family. When our mother died during childbirth with Rebecca, I was only 12 years old. Our father was a drunk who spent his days at the palm wine bar. I dropped out of secondary school to raise Rebecca. I sold akra and puff in the morning before going to work as a housemaid for a Lebanese family. Every kobo I earned went into making sure Rebecca had school uniforms, textbooks, and food. She was brilliant in school. She went to University of Lagos and studied business administration while I was still cleaning other people's toilets. Rebecca used to promise me, Sister Margaret, when I make it, you will never suffer again. I believed her. She opened her boutique when she was 28, and it became successful quickly. Rich women from Ikoyi and Lekki came to buy from her. She got married to a banker named David, who died in a car accident after only 3 years. She never remarried, but she had Patricia, who was 7 when David died. The memorial service was held at a church in Suralere. The place was packed with people wearing expensive lace and jewelry. Rebecca had many friends, or so I thought. I wore the black wrapper and blouse I had sewn myself because I couldn't afford the expensive materials from her shop. I stood at the entrance greeting people, making sure everything was organized properly, just like Rebecca would have wanted. Then Patricia stood up to speak. She's 29 now and works as a banker like her late father. She wore a beautiful black dress with pearls. Her makeup was perfect. She looked like she had been crying, but in that controlled way that rich people cry, not the messy, painful crying I knew. I want to thank someone special, Patricia said into the microphone. Someone who was there for my mother when she needed it most. Mrs. Victoria Matthews. I felt my wrapper slip a little on my waist. I adjusted it with shaking hands. Victoria Matthews stood up from the front row and dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine. Her makeup was flawless. Her hair was in perfect Brazilian weave, and her shoes matched her handbag. She nodded graciously as people whispered and stared. I knew who Victoria was. She had been Rebecca's business partner for the past 10 years. They had opened a second shop together in Abuja. Rebecca always spoke highly of her. Victoria is so smart, so hardworking, she would say. I had met Victoria a few times at family gatherings. She always brought expensive gifts and spoke in that careful English that made me feel small because I dropped out of school. After the service, people came to shake my hand and say the usual things. Your sister was a good woman. She is in heaven now. God will console you. I nodded and smiled, but inside I was breaking apart. I had heard Patricia whisper to Victoria, "You're the only mother figure I have left now." Those words cut deeper than any knife. That night, I went back to my small room in Mushin. I rent one room in a Face Me I Face You compound, where we share toilet and bathroom with 8 other families. My room has a small bed, a standing fan that barely works, and a hot plate for cooking. I have lived here for 15 years. Rebecca used to promise she would buy me a better place, but she never did. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Victoria in her expensive clothes, about Patricia calling her family. I remembered all the nights I stayed in the hospital with Rebecca during her sickness. The doctors had said she needed to control her diet, take her insulin, and reduce stress. I was the one who cooked special meals for her, who reminded her to take her medicine, who held her hand when she was scared. Where was Victoria then? I got up and looked through my old metal box where I keep important papers. Inside were documents Rebecca had given me years ago, before she became so close with Victoria. There were original partnership agreements, property documents, and a letter Rebecca had written to me when she first got sick. The letter said, "Sister Margaret, if anything happens to me, remember that you own half of everything I have." We made that agreement when I started the business. Never forget. The next morning, I went to Victoria's office in Victoria Island. She had taken over the running of both boutiques now. The shop was beautiful, with glass displays and air conditioning. A young girl at the reception looked at me like I was a beggar who had wandered in by mistake. "I'm here to see Mrs. Matthews," I said. "Do you have an appointment?" the girl asked, looking at my faded wrapper. "Tell her Margaret Williams is here. Rebecca's sister." The girl made a phone call, looking surprised when Victoria agreed to see me. I was led to a private office at the back. Victoria sat behind a large desk, looking every bit like the successful businesswoman she was. "Margaret, my dear, how are you coping?" she asked with false concern. "I want to know why Rebecca left everything to you," I said directly. "I am too old for playing games." Victoria sighed like I was a child who didn't understand adult matters. Rebecca and I had a special understanding. She knew I would manage everything properly. She knew I would take care of Patricia. "You are not experienced in these matters." "Rebecca and I started that business together," I said. "I gave her the money to rent the first shop. 20 years ago." Victoria laughed. Not a mean laugh, but worse, a pitying laugh. "Margaret, that was a long time ago. Rebecca paid you back for that small amount. The business grew because of my expertise, my contacts, my business sense. You were just her sister who needed help." I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "We will see what the court says." 2 days later, we all gathered at the lawyer's office in Acadia. The lawyer was a fat man named Barrister Johnson, who kept wiping his face with a handkerchief even though the air conditioner was on. Patricia sat next to Victoria, not next to me. That hurt more than anything. As stated in the will signed by Rebecca Williams 3 years ago, the lawyer began. "All assets including the 2 boutiques, the house in Lecky, the Toyota Highlander, and all bank accounts go to Mrs. Victoria Matthews." Victoria squeezed Patricia's hand and smiled. Patricia looked at me with something like embarrassment, as if I was making trouble by being there. "However," I interrupted, reaching into my bag, "I have documents here that show Rebecca and I had a partnership agreement from the very beginning. She wrote that we would share everything equally." I placed the papers on the desk. The lawyer picked them up, his eyes widening as he read. They were the original partnership documents, notarized and signed by both Rebecca and me 20 years ago. There were also bank statements showing my initial investment of 200,000 naira, which was a fortune at the time. I had sold our mother's land in the village to raise that money. "This changes things," Barrister Johnson said slowly. Victoria's face went pale. "Those papers are fake. Rebecca would have told me." "These papers are real," I said quietly. "Rebecca made me hide them. She said someday I might need them. I think she knew what kind of person you really were." Patricia looked confused. "Auntie Margaret, is this true?" For the first time in weeks, I looked my niece in the eyes. "Patricia, who took care of you when your father died, who paid for your secondary school when your mother was struggling, who stayed with you in the hospital when you had appendicitis at 15. Not Victoria. She only appeared when the business became successful." The lawyer studied the documents for a long time. Finally, he said, "These documents appear authentic. If they are validated, Mrs. Williams would be entitled to 50% of all assets." The room exploded in arguments. Victoria started shouting that I was a jealous sister, trying to steal what wasn't mine. Patricia looked between us, uncertain. But I stayed calm. I had the truth on my side. Over the next few months, we went to court. Victoria hired an expensive lawyer who tried to prove my documents were forged. She told the court that Rebecca had taken pity on me and let me help, occasionally, but I was never a real partner. She produced witnesses who said they only knew Victoria as Rebecca's business partner. But I had something better than witnesses. I had truth. I found the original seamstress who had sewn the first samples for the boutique in her backyard 20 years ago. I found the landlord of the first small shop who remembered me paying the rent. I found bank records showing regular payments from Rebecca to me labeled partnership distributions from years ago. Most importantly, I found Rebecca's old diary. It was in her house, hidden in a box of old photos. In it, she had written, "Sister Margaret gave up her life for me. Everything I have is because of her sacrifice. I must make sure she is never forgotten, even if Victoria tries to push her aside. Victoria is useful for business, but Margaret is my blood. When the judge read those words in court, I saw Victoria's face crumble. Patricia was crying. The judge was a woman in her 60s who reminded me of my late mother. She looked at Victoria with disgust. "It is clear to this court," the judge said, "that Mrs. Margaret Williams was deliberately written out of her sisters while under suspicious circumstances. The evidence shows that Mrs. Matthews had undue influence over the deceased during her illness. The original partnership agreement stands. Mrs. Williams is entitled to 50% of all assets." Victoria screamed. She called me a thief, a liar, a jealous woman. Security had to remove her from the courtroom. Patricia sat frozen, staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. The next few weeks were difficult. Victoria had to sell the Abuja shop to pay me my share. The house was divided. I got 50% of its value. The bank accounts were split. When everything was settled, I had over 40 million naira. It was more money than I had ever imagined. But the hardest part was Patricia. She wouldn't speak to me for months. She had believed Victoria's version of events for so long that accepting the truth meant admitting she had abandoned her real family for an outsider. I used some of the money to move out of my room in Mushin. I bought a small but comfortable flat in Bagoda. It has 2 bedrooms, a proper bathroom, and a kitchen with a real stove. I furnished it simply. I didn't need expensive things. I just needed peace. I also opened my own small business, a food canteen near a busy market. I cook the foods I know best: jollof rice, egusi soup, fried plantain. My customers are not rich people. They are working people like I used to be, people who need good food at honest prices. The business is small, but it's mine, and it makes me happy. 1 year after the court case, Patricia came to visit me. She stood outside my flat looking nervous. She had lost weight and looked tired. She was no longer working at the bank. She told me she had quit because Victoria had tried to use her to access more of Rebecca's contacts and money. "Auntie Margaret," she said, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I was blind. Victoria used me just like she used my mother." I made her sit down and gave her food. We talked for hours. She told me how Victoria had manipulated her, making her feel special and loved while slowly turning her against me. She told me how Victoria had been secretly taking money from the business even before Rebecca died. She told me how alone she felt now. "You were never alone," I told her. "I have always been here." We cried together that day. It wasn't the pretty crying of the memorial service. It was the real, painful crying of 2 women who had lost too much and were trying to find their way back to each other. Patricia started visiting regularly. She helped me in the canteen sometimes, learning to cook the simple foods she had forgotten in her years of eating expensive restaurant meals. We talked about Rebecca, remembering the good times and accepting the complicated times. One Saturday afternoon, we were cleaning up the canteen together when Patricia said, "Auntie Margaret, why didn't you fight harder for me when I was younger? Why didn't you tell me the truth about everything?" I stopped wiping the counter and looked at her. "Because I was poor, and poor people's voices don't carry far. Because your mother was successful, and I was still struggling. Because I thought maybe I was wrong, maybe I didn't deserve to be heard." I paused. But I learned something. Truth doesn't need volume. Truth just needs time. 2 years have passed since Rebecca died. Victoria lost everything. Her reputation was destroyed when the court case revealed how she had manipulated a sick woman. The boutiques were sold. She moved away from Lagos, and I heard she now works as a sales girl in someone else's shop in Port Harcourt. I don't feel happy about her downfall, but I don't feel sorry either. She made her choices. Patricia is doing better. She found a new job at a smaller bank, and she's learning to live more simply. She comes for Sunday lunch every week. We've started a tradition of cooking together and talking about everything. Her work problems, her relationship struggles, her memories of her mother. Last month, we visited Rebecca's grave together. We planted flowers and sat on the grass talking. "Do you think Mama knew what would happen?" Patricia asked. "I think your mother was complicated," I said. "She loved us both, but she got confused about what was important. She thought success and image mattered more than family. But in the end, she left us those documents because somewhere inside, she remembered the truth." "What truth?" "That blood is blood. That sacrifice is real even when it's invisible. That love shows itself in small actions over long years, not in dramatic gestures when people are watching." As I walked back to my car, a small-used Toyota I had bought with my own money. I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about the young girl who had dropped out of school to raise her sister. I thought about the woman who had spent decades being invisible, while others took credit for her work. I thought about the moment I decided to fight back. I am 55 now. My hands are rough from years of work. My face has lines that expensive creams could never smooth away. My wrapper is still simple cotton, not fancy lace. But when I look in the mirror now, I see something I never saw before. I see a woman who stood up. I see a woman who spoke truth even when it was hard. I see a woman who survived. The other day, a young woman came to my canteen. She sat down looking tired and defeated. Her clothes were neat but worn. She ordered rice and stew, but didn't eat much. "Are you okay?" I asked her. She looked up with tears in her eyes. "I gave up everything for my family. I worked and sacrificed. Now they treat me like I'm nothing." I sat down across from her. "Let me tell you something. Your sacrifice is real even if they don't see it. Your worth is not measured by their recognition. And there will come a day when you will have to choose. Keep being invisible or speak your truth. When that day comes, don't be afraid. The truth is stronger than you think." She looked at me with something like hope. I gave her extra food, refused to let her pay, and watched her leave with a straighter back than when she arrived. That night, as I locked up my canteen and walked home through the busy Lagos streets, I thought about how life turns. Rebecca, who had everything, died with secrets and lies surrounding her. Victoria, who tried to steal what wasn't hers, lost it all. And me, who had nothing but truth and patience, found my way back to peace. I am not rich. I will never be glamorous. But I am free. And that is worth more than all the gold jewelry and designer clothes in Victoria Island. Moral lessons. 1. Sacrifice in silence doesn't mean you have no value. Margaret spent decades being invisible, giving everything to her family without recognition. But that sacrifice was real and important, even when others couldn't see it. Your worth is not determined by other people's acknowledgement. 2. Document the truth because memory is selective. Margaret kept the partnership documents, even though she never thought she'd need them. When people tried to rewrite history, she had proof. In life, keep records of important agreements and contributions. Truth needs evidence. 3. Success without integrity is temporary. Victoria achieved everything through manipulation and lies. She looked successful for a while, but it all collapsed when the truth came out. Real success is built on honesty, not deception. 4. Family bonds can be tested, but they can also be repaired. Patricia was manipulated into abandoning Margaret, but when she finally saw the truth, she came back. Relationships damaged by lies can heal, but it takes time, honesty, and forgiveness from both sides. 5. Speak up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. Margaret could have stayed silent and accepted being written out of her sister's legacy. Instead, she fought back. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's necessary for survival and dignity. 6. Don't let poverty silence your voice. Margaret felt she couldn't fight because she was poor and uneducated compared to Victoria. But truth is not about money or education. Everyone deserves to be heard, regardless of their economic status. 7. Real love shows itself in consistent actions, not dramatic gestures. Margaret proved her love through decades of small sacrifices. Victoria showed up with expensive gifts and flowery words. In the end, consistent love revealed itself as real, while performative love was exposed as fake. 8. It's never too late to start over. At 53, after losing everything, Margaret rebuilt her life. She found peace, dignity, and purpose. Age doesn't determine your ability to begin again. As long as you're alive, you can create a new chapter.